Oral questions, questions orales, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, does the Prime Minister want to change anything regarding the testimony he has given in the Senate expense scandal? Mr. Speaker, I've been clear.
As soon as I learned of this matter on May the 15th, we made that matter public. Mr. Speaker, we've taken appropriate actions against Mr. Wright and Mr. Duffy, who now, as the RCMP confirmed, are the individuals under investigation on this matter.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Let me be perfectly clear, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister just said that he didn't know until May 15th, but unfortunately for him, on May 14th, Nigel Wright wrote that the Prime Minister, in fact, did know that he, Wright, had, quote, personally assisted Mike Duffy. Is that true?
Mr. Speaker, let me be very clear about what it's right in the documents, Mr. Speaker, about what Mr. Wright told the RCMP. He said, he told me that Senator Duffy had agreed to repay the money. He told me that he did not inform me of his personal decision to pay that money himself. When I learned of that, I took the appropriate action.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Trying to hold on to a detail. We're talking about the whole scheme that took place in his office. Exactly. On February 22nd, Nigel Wright wrote, quote, I do want to speak to the PM before everything is considered final. An hour later, he wrote, we are good to go from the PM. Mr. Speaker, what did the Prime Minister approve during that hour?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, this is answered right in the RCMP documents. They say, and Nigel Wright said, the Prime Minister was aware on February 22nd that Senator Duffy had agreed to repay the money. I later learned on May the 15th that that was not true. And let me tell you what the conclusion of the RCMP is on this. After months of interviews and review of documents, the investigator says he is not aware of any evidence that the Prime Minister was involved in the repayment or reimbursement of money to Senator Duffy or his lawyer. The RCMP could not be clearer.
Order the Honourable Leader of the Opposition. Order. 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 The Honourable Leader of the Opposition now has the floor.
We are good to go. Good to go with what?
Very good. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Good to go with Mr. Duffy repaying his own expenses. As Mr. Speaker, he has acknowledged I told him personally, as he told everybody he had done, including the Canadian public. And when we found out that wasn't true, we've taken the appropriate action, and he has been appropriately sanctioned by the Senate.
Order. 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 The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
On May 28th, when the Prime Minister was first questioned about the deal with Mike Duffy, he said, and I quote, that he never gave any instruction to his staff on how to handle the Duffy scandal. But we now know from court documents, Nigel Wright went to the Prime Minister for approval of the deal. Why did the Prime Minister say something to Parliament that he knew was not true?
Hear, hear. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, as I've made clear, I was told that Mr. Duffy was going to repay the money himself, something he announced on national television for everybody. That story proved not to be true. When I learned that it was not true from Mr. Wright, on May the 15th, we took the appropriate action, and that is why Mr. Wright and Mr. Duffy are now under investigation.
The Honourable Member for Papineau.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians deserve leaders who tell the truth. The RCMP revealed this morning that the Prime Minister's office...
Order. The Honourable Member for Papineau. Order.
The RCMP...
Order. The Honourable Member for Papineau now has the floor.
The RCMP revealed this morning that the Prime Minister's office was guilty of corruption and that the government has been covering it up for months. Does the Prime Minister still believe that he bears no responsibility for the corruption in his own office?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, once again, what the RCMP has confirmed in its documents today is that two individuals, Mr. Duffy and Mr. Wright, are under investigation for their actions in this matter, and they have also confirmed that this Prime Minister has been telling exactly the truth.
The Honourable Member for Papineau.
Mr. Speaker, for months now, Canadians across the country are questioning what this government is saying. Yet today, we are learning that the Prime Minister has indeed misled the House. Canadians expect more from their leaders. Will the Prime Minister take responsibility and accept to testify under oath? The Right Honourable the Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, the RCMP has confirmed two things today. First, that Mr. Wright and Mr. Duffy are under investigation in this affair and that the Prime Minister has only said the truth. The Honourable Member for Papineau.
When the member from Edmonton St. Albert said that the Conservative caucus had become what they once mocked, non-answers like that are what he meant. 2 weeks ago, everyone in the Conservative caucus stood up, could have stood up for Canadians, and instead chose to stand up to help their leader cover up this scandal. When will the Prime Minister finally put his country ahead of his party and tell Canadians the truth?
Order. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it was only a few sitting days ago that the Senate was asked to pronounce judgment on senators who had behaved inappropriately. Conservative senators voted to sanction those members. Liberal senators, of course, voted not to do that, voted to protect those senators, very consistent with the kind of communist dictatorship that the member so admires.
Order. This is taking up a great deal of time with these interruptions. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition now has the floor.
Nigel Wright dit qu'il est allé voir.
Nigel Wright said that he went to see the Prime Minister for approval. It's written black on white in the RCMP's documents, which are tabled with the court. Is the Prime Minister telling us that Nigel Wright is a liar? The Right Honourable the Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, it's written black on white that Mr. Wright has said that Mr. Duffy would reimburse his own expenses. Later on, the opposite happened. When I learned about what happened, I acted immediately in an appropriate manner. The Leader of the Opposition.
In those documents, what Nigel Wright does in fact say is that the Prime Minister knew that he had, quote, personally assisted Mike Duffy with repaying his expenses. Did the Prime Minister ask Nigel Wright what personal assistance he had given to Mike Duffy? Yes or no?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, once again, the RCMP interviewed Mr. Wright on this question, and he was extremely clear. He said he did not tell the Prime Minister of his eventual personal decision to pay the $90,000 to Senator Duffy. It could not be clearer from Mr. Wright or from the RCMP. The honourable member should accept it.
The Prime Minister keeps trying to hang his hat on the detail of the form of that personal assistance. He keeps avoiding the clear question as to whether or not he knew that Nigel Wright had personally assisted Mike Duffy. Can he tell Canadians what he knew?
Order. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it is in black and white that I did not know. The RCMP confirms it. And, Mr. Speaker, unlike the Leader of the Opposition, it didn't take them 17 years to figure out.
Order. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Est-ce que le Premier ministre
Was the Prime Minister aware of the original plan to repay McDuffie's expenses using money from the Conservative Party? Yes or no? The Right Honourable the Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, from the very start, it has been my position that Mr. Duffy was obliged to reimburse his own expenses. When I learned that the opposite had happened, I acted appropriately. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
The Prime Minister and Senator Irving Gerstein have said that the Conservative Party never agreed to repay any of Mike Duffy's expenses. But on February 22nd, Nigel Wright wrote that he had, quote, the go-ahead from Gerstein to tell Mike Duffy that, again, quote, there will be an arrangement to keep him whole on the repayment, to cover it. Is the Prime Minister saying that Nigel Wright was lying about that too?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
What I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, is that Mr. Wright repaid Mr. Duffy's expenses, although the two of them let it be known to the contrary that it was Mr. Duffy himself who had repaid his expenses. That was obviously not the appropriate things to do. That is why those two individuals have been sanctioned and are under further investigation.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Yesterday, the Prime Minister acknowledged that as Chief of Staff, Nigel Wright was under investigation. The RCMP says that they believe the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff committed bribery, fraud, and breach of trust. Who else in his office knew? Who else was involved?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, if the Leader of the Opposition wants to cite the RCMP, he would note that it is these two individuals and these two individuals who are under investigation for what was an improper payment. I think something Mr. Wright himself admits. And, Mr. Speaker, that is the appropriate thing, that those who undertook these actions be held responsible and accountable.
The Leader of the Opposition.
The question was, who else was involved? Who else knew? June 5th, the Prime Minister in this House, no one but Nigel Wright. October 24th, the Prime Minister in this House, a few people knew. In these documents, 12 people are aware of it. That's the real question. Who else was involved? Who else knew?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
It is very clear from all documents the sole responsibility for these actions rests with Mr. Wright and with Mr. Duffy. That's why these two individuals are under investigation. Mr. Wright has accepted his responsibility, cooperated fully. That's not the case for Mr. Duffy, but we will provide all cooperation and assistance to make sure that those who are responsible are held accountable.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
November 7th, the Prime Minister claimed that his office was not under investigation. Yesterday, the Prime Minister said that his office wasn't under investigation to the best of his knowledge. In the 80 pages of court documents released today, the RCMP listed 12 top Conservative officials whose emails are being investigated. That list includes half a dozen staff from the Prime Minister's own office. How many in the Prime Minister's office have been under investigation? And how many have to be under investigation before the Prime Minister admits that his office is indeed under criminal investigation?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, once again, the documents make clear there are two individuals who are under investigation, Mr. Wright and Mr. Duffy, as has been said from the outside of this affair. Let me say specifically what the RCMP says about PMO. The RCMP investigator reports that he had clear orders from the Prime Minister to provide complete cooperation with the investigation and provide any assistance or documentation the RCMP requested. Is exactly what we've done.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Nice reading, just has nothing to do with the question. Le Sénateur Gerstein.
Senator Gerstein was asked that Duffy's illegal expenses be repaid. He then was asked to speak to Deloitte to try to manipulate the audit process. Who ordered him to do everything in his power to arrange false results of the audit? Mr. Speaker, the RCMP has said clearly that Mr. Wright and Mr. Duffy are under investigation for this affair. And obviously, Mr. Speaker, we expect that the RCMP will continue its work and we will help to ensure that those who are responsible will be held accountable.
Mr. Speaker, according to RCMP affidavits, Senator Irving Gerstein, the Conservative Party money man, planned to use donors' money illegally to pay off Mike Duffy. He even picked up the phone to call Deloitte to have them back off an audit. And he wasn't even a member of the audit committee. So why is Senator Irving Gerstein a member of the Conservative caucus? In fact, why is he even a senator at all?
The Honourable Parliament Secretary to the Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. What's very clear by the documents that have been put into the courts, Mr. Speaker, is that this, again, is between Nigel Wright and Senator Duffy, Mr. Speaker. What is also very clear, Mr. Speaker, is that the Prime Minister, as stated by the RCMP, that the Prime Minister advised and had given clear orders to provide complete cooperation and assistance with this investigation, Mr. Speaker, in contrast to the Liberals, who always protect the status quo, Mr. Speaker. We always stand up for taxpayers, and this Prime Minister has again shown the type of leadership that the Canadians have come to depend on. Open and honest government, Mr. Speaker. That's what they can always rely on for Conservatives, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Beausejour. Mr. Speaker, a member of the RCMP declared under oath to a judge that several crimes were committed inside the PMO. The RCMP also confirmed that Nigel Wright committed an act of corruption in his official capacity as Chief of Staff, and that Mr. Wright waited for permission from the Prime Minister before executing his plan. Will the Prime Minister wait until the RCMP crashes through the door of 24 Sussex Drive before confessing to his role in this affair? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary
is confirming that the Prime Minister did not know about this, Mr. Speaker. That's something the Prime Minister has been saying for months, Mr. Speaker. They refused to listen. Had the Prime Minister known, he would have in no way endorsed such a scheme. The RCMP say they have absolutely no evidence that shows that the Prime Minister knew. Also, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has been saying right from the beginning that we would cooperate and assist the investigation in any way possible, and those were the orders given by this Prime Minister to his office, and the RCMP confirmed that that is what has happened, Mr. Speaker. Open, accountable, transparent government. That's what Canadians want. That's what they get from this Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, day in and day out.
The Honourable Member for
Mr. Speaker, Canadians realize the seriousness of this situation. An RCMP officer swore an affidavit before a judge stating that 3 crimes took place in the Prime Minister's office. The RCMP swear that Nigel Wright acted corruptly in his official duties as the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, but only after explicitly getting the Prime Minister's go-ahead. So what's the Prime Minister waiting for? For the RCMP to kick down the door at 24 Sussex Drive before telling Canadians the truth?
Order. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, what the RCMP said is that this Prime Minister immediately ordered his PMO to cooperate and to assist with the investigation, and that's what they did. Exactly. What they also said, Mr. Speaker, is that the Prime Minister did not know anything about this. What the Prime Minister has said, that had he known, he would have in no way endorsed this. The Liberals know nothing about accountability, Mr. Speaker. They have a leader who praises dictatorships. His main priority is the legalization of marijuana, and as the member for Medicine Hat would have his question outstanding. Where's the 40 million bucks? That's
Order. I think just one member at a time needs to answer questions. The honourable member for Halifax.
Mr. Speaker, can the Prime Minister explain how it was possible for him to claim last May that he had no knowledge of the legal agreement with Mike Duffy when PMO emails released by the police show that Nigel Wright got authorization for the deal in February?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister.
As I said in this House on a number of occasions, Mr. Speaker, Senator Duffy approached the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister said to him, repay any expenses that you didn't incur. It's been quite obvious. Since February, he was told that. He then went on TV and told people, oh, he paid. He got a mortgage out on his home. Mr. Speaker, that was wrong. The RCMP confirmed that this Prime Minister did not know about the arrangement. The Prime Minister, had he known, he would have in no way endorsed such a scheme. Nigel Wright has to accept the consequences of what he has done. Senator Duffy should accept the consequences of what he has done, Mr. Speaker. And the NDP and Liberals should stop defending the status quo.
The honourable member for Halifax.
That wasn't an answer to the question, so let's try again. Documents from February 22nd of this year say, quote, we are good to go from the PM once Ben has his confirmation from Payne. This was about the Prime Minister's lawyer negotiating with Mike Duffy's lawyer. So what did the Prime Minister say to Nigel Wright on February 22nd that gave him the go-ahead?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Speaker, what he said not only to Senator Duffy but to all caucus, repay the expenses that you didn't incur. It's a very simple instruction, Mr. Speaker. If you have an expense that you didn't incur, you better repay it or you're not going to get the support of this caucus, Mr. Speaker. We didn't tell Senator Duffy to go on TV and tell everybody and lie to people about how he repaid those expenses. He made that decision on his own. Nigel Wright made the decision on his own. These two people are under investigation, Mr. Speaker. What's very clear is this. Had this Prime Minister known, he would have in no way endorsed such an action, Mr. Speaker. The RCMP confirmed that, and the RCMP confirmed that this Prime Minister is assisting in every way possible.
The Honourable Member for Pierrefonds-Dollard. On February 22nd, Nigel Wright sent an email to Benjamin Perrin and other people in PMO. In the email dealing with the reimbursement agreement for Duffy's illegal expenses, Nigel Wright said, and I quote, I have the go-ahead on point 3 with some conditions. Who gave Nigel Wright the go-ahead? Would it by any chance be the Prime Minister? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Stated, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister not only told Senator Duffy, but all of the caucus, including MPs and senators, that if you had any inappropriate expenses, you had to repay those expenses, Mr. Speaker. It has been very clear for months that that's the standard that this Prime Minister has expected, Mr. Speaker. What is also very clear is that the Prime Minister did not know. That's in these documents, Mr. Speaker. What's also very clear is that the Prime Minister ordered his office to cooperate and to assist in any way possible. That's real leadership. Contrast that to the leader of the NDP who waited 17 years and couldn't figure out if he got a bribe, yes or no, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Pierrefonds-Dollard. That's hardly answers the question, Mr. Speaker. Wright had the approval on certain conditions. Let me quote him with respect to one of the conditions. I would like to understand who, if anyone, Senator Duffy intends to inform about point 3. I assume that I know the answer, but I would like it to be explicit. For its part, the party would not inform anyone. Was the Prime Minister made aware of point 3 in this agreement? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
And Mr. Speaker, on February 13th, Senator Duffy approached the Prime Minister and he told Senator Duffy, repay any inappropriate expenses, Mr. Speaker. That's what he was told. That's what he was told. Senator Duffy then went on TV and told a different story, Mr. Speaker. We know that wasn't true. What we also know is that the Prime Minister did not know. Had he known, and confirmed by RCMP documents he did not know. Had he known, he would have in no way endorsed such a scheme. And what is also very important is the leadership that this Prime Minister has shown in helping and assisting in the investigation and making sure that RCMP have access to whatever they need, Mr. Speaker, on this investigation. That's real leadership in contrast to the Leader of the Opposition who waited 17 years.
The honourable member for Vancouver South.
Mr. Speaker, online intimidation has been a factor in the tragic suicide of several Canadian teenagers. Our hearts and prayers go out to the families of Amanda Todd, Rutea Parsons, Todd Loic, and all of those who have been tragically affected by cyberbullying. Our government has been clear that there is a point where bullying goes beyond just bullying and becomes criminal behavior. One of the most egregious forms of cyberbullying is the posting of intimate images of a person against their will. Can the Prime Minister please update this House on the action our government will take to protect Canadians from online crime?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the member for the question and her interest in this issue. Trop de jeunes filles au Canada.
Too many lives have been lost, young lives, because of cyberbullying over the internet especially.
Of these families, and we've pledged to take action. Today, our government will be tabling legislation on these specific matters. Let me just say, Mr. Speaker, I think we all understand here that nothing we do can bring back the precious lives that have been lost, but hopefully the actions we're taking today will do some things to change things in the future, and will also provide these families with some sense that their concerns are taken seriously and some sense of justice for their daughters.
The Honourable Member for Rosemont-la-Petite-Patrie. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Senator Gerstein was asked to pay back Duffy's fraudulent expenses. He was then asked to talk to Deloitte in order to change the audit. Now, what we want to know is this: who ordered him to do his utmost to arrange Deloitte's conclusions? Who? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
As I've said on a number of occasions, the Prime Minister, had he known anything about this, Mr. Speaker, he would have in no way endorsed this scheme. The RCMP confirmed that the Prime Minister did not know. The RCMP have also stated that the Prime Minister has ordered his office to be cooperative and to assist in any way possible, Mr. Speaker. But when you talk about honesty in government, this is a member who ran as a federalist but continues to support separatist causes in this country, Mr. Speaker. When you talk about being open and honest, he should maybe be open and honest with constituents. Is he a federalist or is he a separatist? That would be a good starting point, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Rosemont-la-Petite-Patrie. Mr. Speaker, what we've learned today is that the Prime Minister has his own way of calculating things. One person turns into a few people, and then it goes up to 12. That's a pretty interesting way of calculating things. Now, Irving Gerstein clearly attempted to manipulate the outcome of an audit of a Conservative senator. Gerstein is the director of fundraising for the Conservative Party. Why is this man still on the payroll, the public payroll, and still being paid?
Well, there's one thing I know, that only this member can tell us who the fundraising chair for the Quebec Solidaire is, Mr. Speaker, because he's made 29 separate donations to them, Mr. Speaker. Listen, what this is about is Senator Duffy incurring expenses that he was not entitled to, Mr. Speaker. He needed to pay those back. At the same time, he went on TV and told Canadians that he did that. That was wrong. We know that Nigel Wright did that. That was also wrong. Nigel Wright has accepted sole and full responsibility. The information we have, the additional information we have today confirms this, that the Prime Minister's office has been open and honest and has provided any assistance needed, Mr. Speaker, and that this Prime Minister did not know, and had he would have never approved such.
The Honourable Member for Timmins, James Bay.
Thank you. Well, Mr. Speaker, documents released by the RCMP today show us that Senator Gerstein was brought in for discussions with Deloitte about paying back Mike Duffy's expenses. I guess the cover-up theory was that they'd pay back the expenses and they'd make the audit go away. So when the Prime Minister was briefed about this deal on February 22nd, was he informed that Senator Gerstein had been brought in for the discussions with Deloitte about Mike Duffy's audit?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
As I've already said, on February 13th, the Prime Minister told not only MPs but senators, if you have expenses that you did not incur, you should repay those expenses. He said that a number of occasions in this House. I have said that on a number of occasions. That's the standard that we expect on this side of the House, Mr. Speaker. I think that's a standard that all Canadians expect. We also learned, obviously, on May 15th, that the story that Senator Duffy had told about repaying those expenses on his own was not true, Mr. Speaker, and that's why, of course, the Prime Minister has stated that had he known, he would have in no way endorsed such a scheme, but also he's shown the leadership in making sure that his office provides any assistance necessary in this matter.
The honourable member for Timmins, James Bay.
I noticed in his little run through the calendar, he jumped over the date of February 22nd when he was briefed on this. So what we also learned from the RCMP files is that Privy Council employee Chris Montgomery objected to this scheme, and he warned that the senators were actually compromising themselves, yet the scheme went on, and Mr. Montgomery was soon gone. So who moved Chris Montgomery out of the way and instructed Senator Gerstein and Senator Tkachuk to whitewash an audit into the potential misspending by Mike Duffy? Who was involved?
The honourable parliamentary secretary.
Well, again, Mr. Speaker, what is clear in the documents that we received today is that the Prime Minister ordered his office to cooperate and to assist in any way possible, Mr. Speaker. But having this member talk about ethics is very strange. You know, let me quote something. This was the first hint of what the Commission considers to be inappropriate involvement by a member of Parliament in the electoral distribution process. Who are they talking about, Mr. Speaker? The member for Timmins, James Bay. Maybe in a supplementary question, we'll talk about the other member of the NDP who also was implicated in trying to gerrymander their ridings. And then maybe we could talk about the 17 years it took the Leader of the Opposition to disclose a bribe.
The honourable member for Wascana.
Mr. Speaker, the RCMP believed there was a broad-based conspiracy within and beyond the Prime Minister's office to cover up Mike Duffy's situation. The police believe that conspiracy involved the commission of criminal offences. The players were all the Prime Minister's senior entourage: Wright and Duffy, Perrin and Woodcock, Rogers, Novak, Van Hamilton, Byrne, Gerstein, LeBreton, Tkachuk, Stuart Olson, and now we know the PCO was involved too. Despite their denials, a paper trail is on their computers. Who told the Privy Council office to lie to this House?
The honourable parliamentary secretary.
Obviously, Mr. Speaker, he didn't read any part of the report, because this is what it says. It says, the PMO advised my office that he had clear orders from the Prime Minister to provide complete cooperation with the investigation and to provide any assistance or documentation that the RCMP requested, Mr. Speaker. That's what is actually in the report, Mr. Speaker. It also goes on to say, I'm not aware of any evidence that the Prime Minister was involved in the repayment or reimbursement of money to Senator Duffy or his lawyer, Mr. Speaker. So he can get up in this House, make all kinds of accusations, but the facts are what the facts are, Mr. Speaker, that when it comes to showing leadership, it's this Prime Minister shows it every day.
The honourable member for Wascana.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister told us that after he ordered Duffy on February 13th to repay his expenses, that he, the Prime Minister, heard nothing further until May 15th. But from the RCMP documents today, that cannot be true. There was at least one later briefing by Wright and maybe others, and at least in broad terms, the Prime Minister knew Wright had some personal role. This was the Prime Minister's office, his staff, his lawyers, his most trusted inner circle. Would any CEO in the private sector keep his job if so much got screwed up on his watch?
The honourable parliamentary secretary of the Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, last time I checked, this is a member who was a minister in a government that took $40 million. I don't remember him losing his job, Mr. Speaker. I don't remember him losing his job. Contrast that to the leadership of this Prime Minister, who, when he found out on May 15th, ordered the Prime Minister's office to cooperate and assist the RCMP in this investigation, Mr. Speaker. That's real leadership. That's the type of leadership they get from this Prime Minister day in and day out, and that's why Canadians keep rewarding this side of the House with electoral victories, Mr. Speaker, because they know they can trust on us to put their needs first, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for York South Weston.
Today, a rally for affordable housing was held on Parliament Hill, and no Conservative even bothered to show up. And while they were in power, the Liberals eliminated funding for affordable housing until NDP leader Jack Layton forced them to start investing again. Now Conservatives are threatening to end affordable housing agreements, putting 200,000 more families at risk. When will Conservatives do the right thing, restore long-term funding, and commit to addressing this housing crisis?
The Honourable Minister of Social Development.
Well, in point of fact, Mr. Speaker, all the NDP does on housing is attend protests. This government actually provides housing. Every year we provide support for nearly 600,000 individuals and families with subsidized housing. CMHC provided mortgage subsidies for long-term 25 to 50-year agreements, Mr. Speaker. And with Housing First, what we're actually doing is instead of funding advocacy and political work, we're actually giving people the shelter that they need, Mr. Speaker. Action, not just talk.
The Honourable Member for Honoré-Mercier. Mr. Speaker, the Chamber of Commerce of Canada, Food Banks Canada, and the Canadian Federation of Municipalities all agree that the federal government must take action to deal with the housing crisis. In Montreal, rent has gone up by 40% in 10 years. And that's not supportable sustainable for Canadian families. Will the minister commit to providing long-term funding to resolve the housing crisis? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, all the NDP is doing with respect to housing is to attend demonstrations. This government is taking action to provide housing to Canadians who need it. And that is why, Mr. Speaker, each year we provide support for more than 600,000 Canadians and families with subsidized housing. With our new program, Housing First, we will ensure that resources are targeted and go to families who need housing. And we will not be playing politics on this, Mr. Speaker.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. The speech from the throne made it very clear that our government will remain committed to taking action against or to protect public safety, and that we will take targeted action to increase safety of transportation of dangerous goods. Now, this has become an increasing concern, and particularly in my riding, because of recent derailments. So can the Minister of Transport tell this House what additional measures our government are taking to further enhance the safety of the transportation of dangerous goods?
The Honourable Minister of Transport.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I'd like to acknowledge and thank the Honourable Member for his direct work in the derailment that did happen in Vancouver. He was there for his constituents, and he served the public very well in that matter. I'm very pleased today, Mr. Speaker, to speak of the fact that we've issued a protective directive now in order to ensure that Canadian municipalities have their information they need in order to provide appropriate emergency planning, training, and information to first responders in communities where transportation of dangerous goods happen. I think it's an excellent communication between the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, the railway companies, and of course ourselves, and we should be very proud of moving forward.
Honourable Member for Carnegie.
Mr. Speaker, the government is aware that the contract for the Wood Island-Scarborough ferry service expires at the end of March. I hope the government is aware of how this critical transportation link is so important to the economy of Prince Edward Island and Pictou County in Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, can the Minister indicate to this House when a new contract will be signed? Will the contract maintain the service at its present level? And will the contract be for 5 years or more?
More. The Honourable Minister of Transport.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Of course, the government is aware of the importance, and that's exactly why the Minister of Fisheries announced in June of last year our commitment to $13 million for this ferry to ensure that it continue to service and serve the needs of the community in Prince Edward Island. We are very proud of the work we do with our eastern ferries to ensure that we have good service and good transportation links across this country, and we'll continue to work with the communities.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Who ordered the whitewashing of the Deloitte audit into Senate expenses?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I know it's troubling the Leader of the NDP. I know it's troubling to him because
when, in contrast to him waiting 17 years to talk about the fact that he was offered a bribe, he sees the troubles now that Quebec is going through because of his delay in talking that. And he contrasts himself to this Prime Minister, who, as soon as he found out, took immediate action, Mr. Speaker, opened up his office and ordered them to cooperate and to assist with the RCMP. I know he must be embarrassed because there is nothing he can compare to this Prime Minister when it comes to open, accountable, reliable government. If this Prime Minister shows that leadership every single day.
The honourable member for London West.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as the Member of Parliament for London West, I was terribly saddened to hear of the tragic offence surrounding the Walgie family. It was a shock to our whole community. Some media reports and even opposition politicians have implied that the immigration system has somehow failed the Walgie family. So I'd ask, would the Minister of Citizenship and Immigration please advise the House what measures were taken to help the Walgie family?
The Honourable Minister of Citizenship and Immigration.
First, I'd like to thank the member for London West for his question. And on behalf of the Government of Canada, and I hope on behalf of all members of this place, I would like to extend condolences to the Walgie family's friends and loved ones. Although this matter is still under investigation, let me assure this House that this family was offered several opportunities to become permanent residents. They were offered a pathway to permanent residence. That path was not taken. But on this side of the House, we're engaged in mourning the tragic loss of this family. And we will not engage, like some in the opposition, in politicizing cases of this sort, as the member for London Fanshawe has done, for example. We would encourage everyone to joining us in mourning this tragic loss of life.
The honourable member for Western Elkcliff.
Mr. Speaker, on October 31st, the tailing pond dike at the former Obed Mountain coal mine near Hinton, Alberta, failed, releasing 1 billion litres of toxic coal slurry into the Athabasca River. The resulting toxic plume is travelling north and is expected to cross into the Northwest Territories within 2 weeks. As protection of transboundary and northern waterways is a federal jurisdiction, what is Environment Canada doing to protect northern Canadians from this toxic spill?
Mr. Speaker, Environment Canada is supporting the province and providing assistance as required. Environment Canada's enforcement officers are looking into the situation, and our government will continue to take action against those who break our environmental laws. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Bar-Richelieu, Nicolas Bécancourt. Mr. Speaker, CEOs of leading Quebec businesses like Cogeco, Quebec Or, Couche-Tard, Metro, and Jean Coutu are again denouncing the federal government's initiative to set up a National Securities Commission, loss of influence and expertise, distance from capital for Quebec companies, job losses, a weakening of the Montreal economy are additional adverse effects identified by these entrepreneurs. What's worse is that the federal government is taking aim at a system that already works well. Why is the federal government so bent on depriving Montreal of its financial expertise and on hindering businesses in Quebec? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Canada is the only developed country in the world without a single securities regulator. That's why we've been working with the provinces and the territories to establish a single securities regulator for some time. We are pleased to have recently announced the establishment of a cooperative regulator with Ontario and British Columbia. This regulator will promote jobs and growth by better protecting investors, enhancing Canada's financial services sector, supporting efficient capital markets, and managing systemic risk. I strongly encourage all provinces and territories to join in this participation as well. Thank you.
That concludes question period for today. The honourable member for Brampton Springdale is rising on a point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would like to correct the record from the comments that I made during the debate last night in the House. Canadian veterans can be confident that their military service record and any active Veterans Affairs files are available to veterans. Thank you.
Tabling of documents, dépôt des documents. Introduction of government bills. Mr. McKay, seconded by Mr. Blaney, moves for leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Criminal Code, the Canada Evidence